Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, author of A Saga on Home Video, and this time we're taking a look at something from the UK that was covered from the US, at least as part of an episode very recently. It was episode number 501, the 501st episode. That's probably the most appropriate way of saying it for Star Wars. And what we looked at in that episode was seasons 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian coming from the United States, and how each of those seasons had 3 different releases in the US, and then there were some Disney Movie Club goodies as well. So the entire Mandalorian Seasons 1 and 2 product line was covered in one episode because it all released at once. In the UK, they're getting a staggered release. Season 1, then after a little while, Season 2. And thanks to Amazon UK delivering fairly swiftly, we are able to go ahead here as we're heading towards the latter part of December 2023 and take a look at the UK release of The Mandalorian Season 1. And I must say, this is something that actually I think is probably a better purchase choice for someone who is okay with international releases rather than from their particular region, and this is geared more towards US folks. So, talking about something here that'd be international for someone in the US. I do think this is a better purchasing decision, perhaps, than getting either of the American releases, and we will take a look here at why. So you may recall that in 2022, we saw an unusual phenomenon happen in Australia, whereas most of the time, if you were getting a 4K release of something for Star Wars, a Blu-ray copy would be included with it, such that basically you had a 4K film disc, a Blu-ray film disc, and then usually if there was going to be any kind of bonus features, it'd be on another Blu-ray. Perhaps. Blu-ray and 4K combo packs were sort of the norm, but in Australia in 2022, we saw sort of the first inklings of this working a little bit differently, because among 3 different versions of 3 different trilogy sets, we saw that for all 3 of the trilogies, when released on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray and regular Blu-ray in Australia, they did them as 3-disc sets separately. There's also a DVD one of each, but that's not appropriate necessarily for this discussion here. So the idea of separating out 4K and Blu-ray into separate releases did hit in 2022 in Australia for Star Wars. By comparison, you may recall that in France, their set, a little bit bigger, included 4K and Blu-ray together, which is what we would see more commonly. I did show you some UK releases from that same sort of product line. The US didn't get any, but in the UK, there wasn't a 4K version at all, which was a little weird. Well, getting back to this idea of separating out combo packs, we had that phenomenon finally hit the US with The Mandalorian Season 1 and 2. For The Mandalorian, what we got in the US, and these are all in their protective cases, so they will have a little bit of reflection here if they look a little different here. We had a 4K release, but it was just the 4K version of the season. Then we had a Blu-ray release, but it was just the Blu-ray release of the season. Again, Blu-ray and 4K separated out into 2 separate products instead of being together like we would usually see. And then, of course, there was that Blu-ray DVD combo pack version, but that was exclusive to Disney Movie Club and a little bit of an oddball product here. But again, generally speaking, we tended to see Ultra HD Blu-ray discs and Blu-ray discs together in the same packages in the US, and seeing that separated out in Australia seemed weird. Only now, here it is happening in the United States when it comes to The Mandalorian. But you would expect that to perhaps be a different beast because it is a TV series, not just a set of movies. So the question became, what would other regions do? Is this separation a universal thing, or is this something unique to the US? We couldn't say anything for Australia because Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment has basically abandoned the Australian market completely. They don't have Mandalorian releases to look at. So what about one of the regions that we've looked at quite a bit on this series as a comparison to the United States? What about the UK? Well, it turns out that the UK got something a little bit different than what the US got, and frankly, perhaps an item that is going to be preferred by many in the US for importing rather than just buying our own. That is this. Again, the seasons are being released separately, so the first season is the only one that is out right now. The second season is coming soon. This is their release of The Mandalorian, the complete first season. Notice I said their release singular. It's the only one. They don't have multiple. Not 2, not 3 of each like in the US, but just 1. It's immediately obvious as to why up here at the top. 4K Ultra HD plus Blu-ray. Yes, this includes both of our main releases combined into what would be a more typical release for most things in the US. So we have our little tag here, which would have been on the bottom in the US because we don't have quite as elaborate of a J card. This includes bonus extras and concept art cards. So there's a picture of the open package here, though that open package is a little bit of an oddball image here because it doesn't show the arm that'll hold some of the other discs. It just shows sort of the standard package we'd see in the US for both Blu-ray and 4K separately. And it does show the 3 art cards, so in that sense, like what we saw on those American packages, you know, kind of down here on this bottom part. Then we've got the steelbook that we'll look at here in a second. The J card does continue here. It kind of cups it and then wraps around the top with a back to it as well. So the J card says Star Wars The Mandalorian, the complete first season, and has your 2 ratings down here. Either side is going to have your ratings and your product numbers here on the J card. Of course, the spine we'll look at in just a moment. The back is similar to the design we've seen in the US, but of course, it has more required stuff for the UK, so it is somewhat rearranged. So 4K Ultra HD Collector's Edition, complete first season, or the complete first season. No mention of Blu-ray here, but if you look here in the image, it says Steelbook Packaging, illustrated by, and it tells who it's by, but it has a picture of both sets of discs, Blu-ray and 4K, with the 3 art cards. Again, still with that sort of a regular American version of the Steelbook that doesn't have the arm showing there in the image. Episodes here, it doesn't say however many disc set, and then lists the episodes as disc 1, disc 2. It just says episodes, and then lists them, again, still grouped in 4, because that's how they are on the discs. Never before seen bonus extras, same as in the US, Remnants of the Empire and Forging the Covert Part 1. Your image here, quick description. Mostly 4K information here, but then when you get down into this little area, it does give you specifics about the stats for both 4K and Blu-ray separately. Then you have your images, the copy protection thing, Dolby Atmos, Ultra HD Blu-ray, and Blu-ray disc. Then your ratings, UPC, and your legalese down at the bottom. The very bottom has nothing. The top, The Mandalorian, the complete first season. The J card, again, will lift up, and the steelbook comes out. Again, it is sort of that cup-shaped J card. I really like this type of J card compared to US J cards, although most people would just throw J cards away completely, but whatever. And then here is your steelbook. Now, one thing I would note about this steelbook is that just like a lot of the ones that we've seen in the past, it's not as glossy as the US one. It's not as slick feeling as the US one. It's hard to describe. Looks the same, just not quite as reflective or glossy as what we would see on the American version of the same thing, but otherwise essentially the same. So we got that image there with Din, and then Din with Grogu in the pram, Star Wars The Mandalorian, the complete first season. Same back art there, Lucasfilm with the copyright stuff down here. And then on this part, interestingly, we have Lucasfilm, Star Wars The Mandalorian, the 1 there, and then instead of it having a Blu-ray disc symbol over here or a 4K Ultra HD symbol over here, the Blu-ray symbol is underneath the 1 in this case, so the spine is a little bit different also, not majorly so. So for comparison, here's an American one, again, a little glossier on this side. There's the UK one there. Essentially the same there. Essentially the same backs, but the Lucasfilm and copyright is more pronounced and more white here on the UK one than it is here on the US one, but it is on there. And then again, rather than having the Lucasfilm, there's the format and the number without the format on the bottom here for the US, whereas the UK one, again, Lucasfilm, it does have the format there by the 1. Neither of them gives you the complete first season as part of the title there because the 1 is already on the spine. Most notably here, when you open it up, the art cards are inside. They are packaged in here, and that will be a bit of an issue, as we will see in just a moment. As to the discs, they are essentially like what we saw for the US, only with the stuff that's required for the UK here. So here are your 4K discs. We will look at just one of them. Star Wars The Mandalorian, the complete first season. Disc 1, episodes 1 through 4. 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, Lucasfilm, the required ratings, product number there with your legalese running around the side. Again, with that whole silhouette kind of thing going on here. Although I will say that while the designs are similar, notice one thing a little bit different here. I'm going to put a couple of these up side by side, see if you can note the difference. It's still Din and Grogu. US here, UK here. Notice, for the US it's a little tough to read because it's that whole silver of the disc, and they just sort of made silhouettes out of everything with the color blocking everything off. But it's not like there's really color per se for the art parts. For the UK, similar design here, similar look, except it's actually white print and a white silhouette here. It's not see-through, so to speak, for the UK, making it not quite as cool looking with it being, ooh, reflective silver silhouette, but it's a hell of a lot easier to read and a little bit clearer in terms of the silhouette itself. And the same is the case with your disc 1 and disc 2 for the Blu-ray discs. In this case, it does have the region coding at the bottom, the ABC as well, but again, laid out in a similar fashion, just with Blu-ray. I don't know if anybody does want any more detail on the Blu-rays, but just to give you the more detail, Star Wars The Mandalorian, the complete first season, you got your silhouette, disc whatever, episodes whatever, in this case disc 1, episodes 1 through 4, Blu-ray / Blu-ray disc, logo there, Lucasfilm, ratings, legalese running around the bottom, product number here, and your ABC down there. I would note that at least for the 4K discs in the UK, there is no region ABC kind of stuff, because that's just not really a thing you tend to see with 4K Ultra HD discs, but in the US, you do have it down here. So a little bit of a slightly different design in terms of what is provided, but the biggest difference being silvery, clear silhouettes versus white. The actual steelbook is more like what we saw with the Blu-ray DVD combo pack coming from Disney Movie Club in the US that requires that arm to hold a couple of extra discs, so there's a space on either side, and then the arm. The artwork there is still Din with the pram that has Grogu in it, reaching up, E.T. style. And the art cards are still the same 3 art cards as we saw for the US. Same setup there to the back. But remember what I said was kind of an issue and an interesting thing about the way that we saw things provided by Disney Movie Club. Remember that in the US for Disney Movie Club, we still got the art cards, but the art cards were provided separately in their little shrink wrap instead of just loose inside the packaging with the discs, because with the arms, the little prongs that stick out would mean that no matter where you put the different art cards, they'd be pressing against the prongs when it's closed. And sure enough, I don't know if you can see here, you can see indentations from the prongs into the art cards because of the way they have to be stored, packaged inside with the discs themselves for this UK version. So if there's one thing that stands out with the UK version that I think is perhaps subpar, I think you could go either way on whether you prefer the silvery disc stuff that's harder to read, although not overly so, but certainly looks really cool on the US version versus what we saw with the UK version with actual white. I think your mileage will vary on those. I think you could go either way. If there's one thing that is definitely subpar for the UK version, it is the fact that by packaging the art cards inside with the discs, you've got a situation here where because it's 4 discs, it needs the arm, you can't just slip these into a safe little spot. You are going to see some indentations probably into your art cards. Same thing on the back of this one. My suggestion would be if you do have the UK version, at least put the art cards so that the backs are facing this way when you're storing it, so that at least if there is any indentation, it's mostly into the back you're not going to be looking at, not the art itself. I would also note, if we want to do a direct comparison here, and I'll go through the comparison as kind of a bullet point here at the end, because I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, the art cards are a little thicker for the UK than they are for the US. The US ones are a little bit more glossy than the ones from the UK. The product information, product number stuff on the bottom here on the back of the cards, while also in the same place, are slightly different numbers. For example, if I look at the number on the back of this one from the US, from the Blu-ray set, or from the, from the 4K set, the product number on the back says 8102100, whereas the one for the UK says BUT 4020801IN2, which is sort of like the international one, I would assume, because the IN at the end. And whereas the number is the same on the back of all 3 for the US, That IN ends with a 1, 2, or 3 for the ones from the UK. So before one last rundown of comparisons, American Blu-ray versus UK Blu-ray, if you wanted to see that as a comparison as well, but it is effectively the same difference in how they are designed from UK to US as we saw for 4K. So let's summarize here. Number 1, in the US, the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray version of the complete first season of Mandalorian and the Blu-ray version of the same thing are separate releases, whereas in the UK, they are in the same release. In the US, your J-cards simply go over the back and curl up over the front with nothing at the top. That's regardless of which release we're looking at, whereas in the UK, there's only the one release. You have a nice closed J-card to sit it into, and then a flap that folds over the top. For the US, the steelbooks are somewhat glossy, as are the art cards, which, except in the case of the ARM version of the steelbook for Disney Movie Club, have a nice safe place to be stored inside your steelbook. Whereas in the UK, you have a less glossy steelbook finish and thicker but less glossy art cards, which do not have a really safe place inside the steelbook because of the indentations that you're going to get from the prongs. So you might store these behind the steelbook inside the J-card, similar to how I went ahead and stored the ones that we looked at in episode 501 for the Blu-ray DVD copy from the US. I'll show you how I'm going to do that here in just a second. You do have the slight differences with the steelbooks on the spines in terms of where the format is, if it's on there at all, if Lucasfilm is on there at all. And yes, the Lucasfilm and copyright is a little bit brighter, so to speak, more white than silverish on the backs of the UK steelbook. And whereas the distribution of episodes, 4 for the first disc and 4 for the second, is the same for the UK for 4K and Blu-ray as it is in the US, and the bonus features are on the second disc of both, as again in the case in the US, the disc labels are different, not just because of the ratings. So the US has those odd silhouetted ones with the silver coming through or clear aspect coming through, whereas in the UK, they are white to give you the silhouettes and all the information. Possibly because you can't really do that clear silhouette thing as easily with those ratings that need to have the color on the rating symbols. But if any of that seems better to you, and having a combined package seems better to you, then maybe if you're in the US, you might hold off and not pick up the US releases, though many of us already have, and perhaps instead focus on getting that UK release. One item, you still get the art cards, you still get the steelbook, you still get the Blu-ray and 4K discs, except you only have to buy it once because it's a combo pack. As to how I'm going to package it, as I said, I got my UK J-card. I'm going to stick it inside to fold it over, but then I'm going to take the art cards, and instead of sticking them inside the steelbook where they'll get punctured perhaps by those spokes or whatever you want to call them, I'm just going to slip them behind in the J-card and then let it fold over like that. Then I always put mine inside a protective case. I get mine from a website called retroprotection.com because somebody asked about that recently. Just safely slip it in there and close it up. Good to go. So yes, the UK has now got its first season of The Mandalorian. I doubt we need to spend as much time on it when we look at Season 2 of The Mandalorian coming from the UK when it does finally release, because I imagine that the comparison to the US will be essentially the same. But since this one had so many small detailed differences between the UK and US, and it was a combo pack that the US didn't get, I felt it really kind of deserved a little bit more time in this episode than we might otherwise have spent on just looking at a foreign version of something we saw in the US. Hopefully you felt that comparison worth your time in terms of making decisions on which ones you might want to add to your Star Wars home video library. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers, no matter which formats happen to be in your packs in your region. Hey, at least we got physical releases at all, right? I feel for those in regions who didn't get any at all.